Well, my friends, this is History Revisited, and this is Rick, an opinionated 55-year-old SOB, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, it's been a minute. You know, when I want to do videos for this specific channel, I wanted to have something with some substance and that really kind of interests me, and it takes me, you know, a while to decide which one I'm going to go after next. And this one here is, we're talking about the Library of Alexandria. It is something I am of the opinion that we take for granted today. We do not really truly appreciate on the big scale of things of just how prevalent education and learning is in our society in the world today. In my state of Iowa, there are 3 major universities and quite a few secondary major universities. And I cannot begin to tell you how many colleges and trade schools and other schools that exist in this state. But we have Iowa State, we have Iowa, we have Northern Iowa State, we have Drake University, we have a branch of the William Penn University. There is numerous community colleges and smaller colleges, both private and public. And the point I'm trying to get at is that at no point in human history has so much of the percentage of the planet's population been in possession of both being literate to one degree or another and having access to education on multiple levels, and the advantages that come with having vast repositories of knowledge, of creativity, of fiction, of histories, of just the sheer volume of material. And then we magnify that even by a whole new level with the addition of the internet and access to lots of material that wasn't necessarily accessible to the general public not even 20 years ago. So the fact of the matter is, our entire civilization on the world scale is so interdependent with this idea of education and knowledge and access to knowledge that we take, like I said, we take it for granted. One of the things that one of my instructors told me when I was in college that kind of sticks to mind, he said to us at the beginning of our semester, was that I'm going to teach you the most valuable tool that you'll ever need to be successful in any endeavor you try, and that is how to find the knowledge you want. And something to that effect. I'm not actually quoting him verbatim, but to the fact was, he said, I can teach you how to do something, but it's more important for me to teach you how to find things out for yourself and how to find additional information. So what he was basically saying is that the course studies that I took were not the end all to beat all. You weren't going to learn everything there was to know in that field, in the classroom, ever. And that most of what your education was going to be was to give you the tools and the guides and to set you on the path of self-learning and self-education to expand upon the building blocks that you learn at the institution. This is one of the reasons many people go from the level up. They go from high school to a junior college or to a college, and from there to a bigger university. And some people continue to pursue higher learning, bachelor's and doctorates and so on and so forth. Now, if you go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, this was very, very rare. Very, very few people even understand the concept of reading. It was considered magical. It's often referred to this in subject material. So the idea that there was these vast universities, these vast libraries of knowledge on a large world scale was all but non-existent, as best as we can tell. The most prominently one acknowledged by today, and today, of course, is the Library of Alexandria. The fact that if you think about Alexander the Great himself, out of the hundreds of millions of people who have born, lived, and died on this world, there's only a handful, a few thousand or so, whose names have endured the depths of time. And even fewer of those names do we have as much information and stories on that particular historic figure than people like Alexander. Because, and in part it's because he was such a flamboyant and driven individual, and the people around him cared enough to continue those stories and not to dilute them or distort them. That is a big truth in even modern today's society. I remember when I was a young man, there were several groups of moral individuals or moral mindset organizations that had this belief that certain types of literature have no business being in public libraries or in school libraries, or that we should not have access to them, and they did their level best to prevent that. And despite the fact in this country that the right of free speech is a paramount part of any kind of democracy. And in the last year, has seen a horrible test or stress test of our democracy, and in part because of the dangers of having that free speech, that anybody can say anything, especially in this anonymous platform that we use today of social media. We can basically make any kind of claim unsubstantiated, and it's up to the other person to vet it, to decide if we're telling the truth, or we're spinning a lie, or if we're twisting the truth, or we're omitting something, and so on and so forth. So if you go back through time, this has been repetitive. It's repeated. There was a time in the late 30s, early 40s in Nazi Germany when they were on a book burning jag. I imagine there's been suppression in a lot of countries over the centuries. Russia comes to mind. Some of those Islamic states come to mind, where if it's not part of the dogma accepted by their religion or by their political machine, then it has to be banned and destroyed or buried away somewhere. So we don't have access to the truth or to another person's opinion of the truth. It's just like this video. This is yet one of thousands and thousands on the topic of the Library of Alexandria and free speech and things like that. But it's just my humble opinion, and it's only valued by me and maybe a handful of people who view the thing. Like I said, I do a separate channel for my role playing game hobby, and I do not get nearly as many hits on that subject material as I do on the ones on this channel. And so I take it a little bit more serious to be sure of putting something of consummate value, at least from my perspective and how I view things. Rather, it's the idea is to provoke conversation and thought, to think about stuff. It's like my beliefs on Bob Lazar and many of the stories and legitimacy. I did plenty of those videos, and I still get commentary occasionally from people that are pro and con, and that's awesome. That's the whole thing. It's a big part of this. So we look at the history. There's another ancient library is becoming more well known today, would be the libraries at Timbuktu, which had huge amounts of African lore and literature, and that was both destroyed and stolen and hidden for centuries, right? And this is true and all through history. We look at, like I said, all you got to do is go back to the 40s when the Nazis were ransacking Europe of its treasures, and that included its libraries. And a lot of the stuff disappeared, was destroyed, was never recovered. It's probably sitting in private libraries of the wealthy and the rich, or buried away in some institution vault somewhere where people don't want nobody else to know they got them, because now they're afraid to admit that they've been sitting on them for so long, et cetera, et cetera. We may never know the truth. So Alexander the Great decided to build a city, and I'm not going. There's plenty of stuff on him and his history and how the city came about, et cetera, et cetera. But it was a testament of his forethought and his concept of education and knowledge, that education is knowledge and knowledge is power, that he established this place that was conducive for scholars of all types to come together from all walks of life and all ethnic backgrounds and all religions to congregate and to discuss and to debate and to argue and to explore and to create. And so we have this place that's much, much more than just a library. It was a university in all but name of its time. And people come to learn, people come to share, people come to explore. Now, the destruction of the library is also well documented. There was a fire, though it's debated whether how much of the library was actually destroyed by the fire. There were several. There was after the Ptolemies dynasty failed with Cleopatra. The Romans just weren't interested in keeping up the library because it wasn't profitable in their eyes, and they already had one, so their own version, and it declined. I think the library's failure was mostly to do from two things. One, it served as an example for better part of 300 years of a good concept that was repeated at other places around the world that had not done so prior to that. So then we see more libraries, more centers of education and learning appear. There's a famous Roman one, and I remember seeing the name a couple times in some of the videos I viewed over the last couple weeks. But for the life of Pete, I didn't think to write it down, so I apologize for that. It's like the library at Timbuktu. I know there's a formal name for that collection of structures back in the day, and I don't believe I wrote that down either. Anyway. No point in history prior to the creation of the Library of Alexandria is there any true reference, any overtly well published references to something like it. I'm sure there were libraries and collections, and many of them would have been held by the church leadership and or nobles, because the further you go back in history, the more illiterate people were, to a point where only the we call it the elite in their societies had this ability to read and or write and to recognize what they were writing. Other than it was before that, it was oral traditions, and in combination with the written, it was oral traditions. And then of course a lot of material was written. There was, and we go back in more recent modern times or ancient times, it was, I believe, Luther, who created the first concept of the first printing press, where he could mass produce the Bible, his version of the Bible, and it took off from there, because at that point more and more people would have access to written material. You talk about the Library of Alexandria, they did discuss the huge volumes of scrolls, because most of the material was written on papyrus scroll, and that it was a one-shot wonder. So if somebody just made some great discovery or some epiphany of knowledge, and he documented it, he put it down, and there was just that single original print, and there were no others. There might be the occasional copy, and this is where somebody painstakingly sat down and copied everything that was on that papyrus. There was also a change in dialect or language at the time that caused a lot of that stuff to become unreadable. The same thing happened to some of the stuff that was at Timbuktu. So you had lots of this written material, but you couldn't nobody knew how to translate it until many centuries later. In some cases, never. We still see some pretty strange and mysterious books of antiquity that are around, that some of them defy convention and understanding. They're either utterly fantastic or they are works of actual fiction, which is plausible. If they were writing, if anything, humanity loves a good story, whether it's true or not. And I imagine that made its way into the writing of the ancient days too. Prior to that, it was text-based or glyphs, hieroglyphs, things like this that were carved in stone, and the Egyptians were doing that for millennia, and so were the Chinese. Right. So there's this idea of written and gathered knowledge is not as old as humanity to some element or another, but it was not. It was very rare, very focused on small numbers of hands, and very few people knew how to use this magical concept until the more recent centuries of because there was you go back to the Middle Ages, there was a belief that only the clergy and the nobility should be able to read, because once again, knowledge is power. And with the serfs and the workers of the world need to have any of that. Their job is to work and produce and do what they're told. And we're kind of have some mindsets of people today that still believe that, and or try to hide real hard that they don't believe it, but that's just the facts of the world. So the fact that we have this great institution in antiquity that was kind of novel and revolutionary, and is the beginning roots, or the real starting point of modern libraries and locations of learning, of education, and that they also promoted that everybody should have the right to learn, and to learn how to read and things like this, which is a dangerous concept in the eyes of people who like to keep control of stuff. And we still see some of that today too. There's some of that mindsets around the world, and including some of our first world nations. America, like I said, we've had a pretty rough road this last year, and there's still a lot of ignorance, willful ignorance out there, and it's just appalling and distressing. That it also should be a reminder, just like the Library of Alexandria was eventually destroyed, consumed, dispersed in various periods and epochs. Our modern society is also susceptible to seeing history be rewritten, science being pushed down, potentially the loss of a lot of that material. Now, I will grant you, it's almost an impossible concept to think of that today, that would be true, because there are so many places out there, so many private and public institutions and organizations that are doing their level best to keep knowledge active and going, and to preserve all this stuff. Because if you think about scientific breakthroughs and medical breakthroughs and knowledge of the ancients, there's evidence over and over and over again that there were periods in human history that saw a surgence, or an advancement in concepts and knowledge and capability and innovation, and then seeing them slide back down the hill. And if they'd had the ability to promote and to spread that knowledge on a much wider, broader front like we do today, that just how much more advanced would our society be today? Now, how much stuff have we learned and forgotten, or lost, or had destroyed, and then had to relearn, and had to rediscover, and find a different path to the same conclusion, that we, if we hadn't had to do, would have been much more, the advancing building blocks of our knowledge system would be so much more richer than it is today. And that's just my opinion, of course. So I thought, when I was watching these other videos on the Library of Alexandria, that I wanted to put my 2 cents worth in, my opinion, on just how important this concept, this structure, this place was to all of us today, and just how much we owe to somebody like Alexander Great and others who come up with this brilliant idea of massing information and knowledge and making it available to anybody, and actively encouraging people to come and to study and to learn, right? And that also makes me ponder and think about how much hidden knowledge is stashed away. I was watching one of these videos last week on the Library of Alexandria, and they were talking. No, that was a Library of Timbuktu, and they were talking about that there's a number of institutions. And once again, I didn't think to write the name of the particular one they were talking about down, that has gobs. Oh, I think it's Oxford University. If somebody knows that this is not correct, please by all means put a comment down below saying that I'm wrong. But I think Oxford University maintains this massive supercomputer that basically copies down the entire contents of the internet every day. That it constantly updates itself, and everything we do today in social media is kept pretty much forever. So my videos here on YouTube, even if YouTube was to chuck them, are now stashed away in some other computer bases somewhere that somebody 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now may want, stumble across and blow the dust off of them and get a chuckle out of how ignorant and stupid my opinions were or are, and etc. Or maybe think this person here was onto something. At least he was trying to be a bit more educated than he was the day before. And my grandfather, who rest his soul, was quite a character. Uh, he was a truck driver. Then he became a diesel mechanic. He owned his own shop for a while. He was also a roadside preacher, fire and brimstone type, throw Bibles at you. Had a little church for a number of years. Taught. Ran a church out of his house before that. Uh, he had a number of pithy sayings, like a lot of our elders do, and sometimes we actually do listen and learn from them. And he said that you never stop learning. If you're anything more than an ignorant beast, you never stop learning, because every day is a new experience. Every day brings you something different, and you may not recognize it for knowledge. You may not recognize it as what it is, but we never truly stop learning until we die. And to be truth, he says, God's waiting for us, and we're going to keep on learning right after we die. So you never stop learning. And he would truly believe that. And I kind of believe that there's a lot to be said there. There's so many people in the world that I know personally that they embrace ignorance as a cloak. It's comforting, and it's easier if you don't worry about the bigger picture, if you don't try to understand what's going on around you other than your own personal purview. And I'm not faulting people for doing that or having that belief and mindset and action, but it distresses me a lot, because it's hard to have conversations with somebody who purposely is ignorant or intentionally is ignorant. It's even worse to have one who's purposely being obtuse. They're going to sit there and argue for the sake of arguing, even though they know in their heart the truth is what it is. And you want to spin it into something else. They want it to be something else, and it doesn't turn out that way. And that's often the way of how truth works, how knowledge works. And the same value, in the same breath, I also like to believe that sometimes the educated and the high and mighty, when it comes to their knowledge, are also a bit obtuse and blind, because they believe that they know all there is to know. It's why I honestly believe that we don't know everything. We're never going to know everything. And even though we have a world full of absolutes, that this absolutely must be this particular way because that's how we agree with it, we've decided it, our specialists, our knowledge, our gurus, whatever. And yet, sooner or later, we find that it's not totally black and white, that there's layers of gray, and perhaps what we think is the truth is completely wrong. And it's not because it's false, it's just because we've closed ourselves off from the idea that there might be another possible answer. So it's like when we talk about Bob Lazar. Okay, Bob Lazar, as an individual, his stories, etc., aside, my opinion in that case is that it's a healthy discussion to question whether or not we are alone in the universe. Statistically speaking, by the numbers, that the answer is no. I mean, are we being manipulated, controlled by little gray aliens? Probably not. I can't imagine that they would want to stick around with this hot mess that we are as a society and as a people. Have they possibly come here and intervened or meddled? Absolutely possible and plausible. And the reason I argue that is just because that's what we would do in their stead. The time will come, assuming we don't destroy ourselves or blow up the planet or destroy our ecology and economy and put ourselves into another dark age, which is always one step away. We're always just two steps and a handshake away from totally screwing our society and civilization up. And so many people are ignorant, purposely, intentionally ignorant and blind to the fact of that. Such things are very fragile and take constant maintenance and work from everybody involved, whether they like to or not, or they want to admit it or not. So the fact is, we're always two steps away from possible becoming sent back to the Stone Age or something equivalent of it. But assuming we've gotten past the worst of that stuff and we continue progressing forward, at some point we will find a way to travel to the other, out there to the stars, to the other planets, to the neighboring solar systems and the galaxy at large. And when we get there and if we discover that we are the little green men, at that point, that there are no great vast federations of planets waiting for us to join with open arms, but we find many small and tiny isolated worlds scattered about with burgeoning with life, and a handful of possible sentient beings on them who are eking their way out of their own version of the Dark Age, Stone Age era, that we will manipulate them, we will interact with them, we will try to do things and stuff to improve their lives or to gain control over their lives or to understand how they work and think and operate. You know, we look at the history of medicine, for example, we owe another thanks to the Library of Alexandria in some aspects, because it's my understanding that a lot of the cultures back then, and it still holds true to some today, were adverse to meddling with the human body. And what I mean by that was the Egyptians had a long tradition of embalming and dissecting bodies and dealing body parts and things like this as part of their religion. So they were much more open-minded to the idea of scholars dissecting a corpse, a cadaver, and learning from the secrets under the flesh, whereas in the Greek societies of that era, it was abhorrent and against their religions to do such a thing. So scholars could not, on pain of death, you know, learn things that they need, that we benefit from and benefited from in their own lands. They had a place that they could go and learn those things and do those things, and we, in the long run, benefit from it. Sometimes it seems horrific and terrible, but the truth is, the human complexity is, we need to know what we need to know, and sometimes it's a messy road to get to that knowledge. Sometimes it's a dark road to get to that knowledge. And I can go back once again to the era of the Nazi Party and Imperial Japan, about the same era where they were experimenting on human beings, and they were experimenting on a lot of stuff and doing a lot of things that would be, extremely unacceptable by any standard of most civilizations, even at that time, let alone today. Now we do that sort of stuff. It's part of understanding of the sciences and medicine and things like this, and we've greatly benefited from it. So once again, how much information has been lost over the years, over the centuries, from ignorance and intentional stupidity and purposely trying to rewrite history and change things and prevent that knowledge from getting in the hands of people who actually benefit from it, because by God, the only people that need to know something is the people in charge, blah, blah, blah. All right, ignorance is not bliss. That's a farce and foolhardy at the worst, in the worst case. Purposely going through life as an ignorant buffoon is also stupid in more than one way. So I know that's an oxymoron, but guess what? That's an oxymoron because these people are morons. They intentionally shut themselves off to understanding that there are bigger things around them and that they're part of that piece. I mean, I can go off on all kinds of right-wing, left-wing conspiracy bullshit, but that's not what I'm about. At least that's not my intentions anyway, right? So I probably should I'm starting to run on to Babel and things like that. The idea here, back to the Library of Alexandria, is an awesome concept of its time. And the fact that we still know as much as we do, or we think we do, about it is a testament to a lot of that knowledge and information. But more importantly, humanity and civilization as we know it has vastly benefited from this concept. And I honestly, truly believe that there probably were other or similar institutions on a smaller scale in the world even prior to this. I mean, we know that The Greeks, for example, were big on learning and knowledge and this, that, the other thing, and they had small schools, and there were small schools in Egypt and other places that taught basic stuff. But to have a place where you can really go to the wall to expand for the sake of expanding knowledge and understanding is a fantastic concept. And just how different would our world be today if we didn't have all those hundreds of universities and colleges and schools and public networks for sharing knowledge and I mean the whole concept of the internet itself came out from the idea of a bunch of a bunch of high muckety muck scholars wanting to share ideas quicker than by mail, right? Well, just saying. Till next time, this is Rick, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.